exceed the time that we have today. Remember that the patriarchs sort of defined the Israelite people as herders of flocks. Sheep became the sacrificial offering for the Passover, which really identifies the Jewish people. And then when the temple was finally built, sheep are a deeply entrenched part of the day-to-day life of the Israelites and their liturgical practice. So I'd like to highlight just a couple of shepherds from sacred scripture, particularly from the Old Testament. Probably the most well-known shepherd in Hebrew scripture is David. Remember, David is the 8th son of Jesse of Bethlehem. And you know, when reading sacred scripture, I know we all know that when there's one son, okay, that's just the story of a lineage. But if there are more than one son, there's always a lesson involved. So when you think of David as the 8th son, there's going to be a really important lesson through the choosing of David. Now, David was a shepherd. He was also a musician. And he becomes a warrior whom God chooses to anoint as king. So not only David was a shepherd by occupation and vocation, but it's also under David that the office of shepherd becomes linked to kingship. And you remember, we baptize and are baptized into Christ as priest, prophet, and king. It's that connection with the Davidic line that we're talking about. The identification of kingship with shepherding is kind of unusual when you think about it. Since the kings of ancient times, they expected to be served, not to serve. They impelled their subjects to obey. They did not lead them or guide them in trust. The pharaohs and Caesars of ancient times declared themselves offsprings of the gods, not servants of the one God. But in David, we see a simple shepherd turned warrior, turned leader, and finally king, who is also shepherd to his people and protector of the covenant between the people and God. And I think that's a really key position that we should think about as pastors, that we are the protectors of the covenant between God and God's people. And we see how we do that through the sacraments. It's an incarnational way. Through David, the image of shepherd is ascribed to God himself. So God becomes the shepherd. And it's an image that is repeated by the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Micah, Amos. We see the description of God as shepherd in the 23rd Psalm. And I know we use that and hear that so often that maybe we don't always really think about what it's saying. It's a psalm that's ascribed to David. And you know how it goes. This is a little bit different translation from what we use in the liturgy. The Lord is my shepherd. There is nothing I lack. In green pastures he makes me lie down. To still waters he leads me. He guides me along the right paths for the sake of his name. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. This is the first half of the psalm. And in it, the verbs, the actions that you hear are very much kind of traditional actions of a shepherd. A shepherd with the staff leading the sheep. Finds pasture, still waters. He leads, restores, guides, comforts, and with him there is no lack. There's a second part to the psalm though, right? And it's a little bit different. You set a table before me in the sight of my enemies. It's not what a shepherd does, but the shepherd king does that. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Indeed, goodness and mercy will pursue me. I love that translation of this psalm. Usually we say goodness and kindness follow me all the days of my life, right? It's kind of passive. But think about God and how he comes after us. It's a pursuit. And that image of God, he's going to catch you. And God's mercy is inevitable. It's going to catch up to us. I love that. It's pursuing us. Sometimes we're trying to get away from it. We'll talk about that a little bit later, and before we do our benediction. But this pursuit by mercy of us. So indeed, goodness and mercy pursue me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord for endless days. The second part of the psalm, the shepherd is set up as this minister of hospitality, right? And is added to that role of shepherd and king. He sets a table. He anoints. Think of Jesus being anointed when he went to the home of Martha and Marian. Goodness and mercy pursue me. So we have this role of shepherd that is expansive. Not only does the shepherd lead, but the shepherd is host to the flock who are welcomed to his table. They dwell in his house. We see how this applies to the priest as shepherd and celebrant. It's a powerful image. There's another story of shepherd that I'd like to talk about. Is kind of, I think it's worth bringing up because I don't think that we hear about it all that often. And it's about the first shepherd. The first shepherd in Scripture is Abel. Referred to in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, and in the Roman canon as Abel the just, son of Adam and Eve, brother of Cain. Okay, Abel is described as a herder of flocks, so a shepherd, really the first shepherd. But I don't want to talk about Abel. Because no offense to Abel the just, he's really not very interesting. He's out of the picture too soon. Cain, on the other hand, is name that Eve gives to him, it's kind of interesting. In different cultures, you have the mother name and you have a father name. In this case, it's Eve, the mother, who gives the name Cain. And she uses this Hebrew word that denotes the act of fashioning something. It's actually has, it is used mostly in terms of metal, making something out of metal. And she makes the comment that she gives him the name, and she says, because I'm continuing, that I have fashioned a child with the Lord's help. So she fashioned a child. Remember what God did with Adam and Eve? Fashioned them out of the earth. Okay, so here's Eve is continuing that work of creation. I think it's a beautiful image that continues with us, really. We fashion things with our own hands. Continuing the work of creation. And it also introduces this theme of incarnation, that this incarnation is a continual act. Cain is not a shepherd. He's a farmer. Flying in here, I saw lots of the fields and all that. You have lots of farmers around here. It's a respectable job. And remember what did Adam do? Adam was a farmer. After the expulsion from Eden, remember God said, with the sweat of your brow, you will work the earth. Adam becomes a farmer. And so what is his first son? Remember, this is his first son. And there's more than one son, so there's a lesson in this, right? So his first son follows his footsteps. He's doing what his dad did. I think of my own family. I have a twin brother who's 5 minutes older than I am. So I introduce him as my older brother now. When we were growing up, he always made a big deal about being 5 minutes older. Now it's my turn to... my dad, actually my grandfather was a printer. My dad was a printer, and my brother is a printer. So it was something that, the first sons did. So Cain followed in his footsteps. And so we go into the story of Cain and Abel, and you know the story. Both offered sacrifice to God. The first fruits of their labor. So Cain would have offered some of his, wheat or barley, whatever it would have been, to say, and Abel sacrificed, a sheep probably, or the innards of the sheep. And there's really no reason given. I know scripture scholars like to say, well, the Israelites identified themselves as herders of sheep, and so they're going to, show God really prefers this than the first fruits of the land, or the cultic celebrations. They sacrificed animals, so they wanted, just to show that was something better. There's no reason given in Scripture for God's rejection of Cain's offering. But when Cain reacts, Cain is disappointed. God speaks to Cain. God never speaks to Abel. He speaks to Cain. Not once, but twice. How many times has he spoken to anybody here? First, he tells him that if he does what is right, he will be accepted. So what had just happened, he felt like he was not accepted. Now, God is saying, if you do what is right, you will be accepted. And literally, the Hebrew word means you will be lifted up. You will be lifted up. Think about the season that we're coming up to. Jesus is lifted up. We are lifted up. If you do what is right. And he also tells Cain that you can rule over your sin. You have this strength to rule over your sin. Of course, Cain does not do what is right. And he literally becomes the anti-shepherd by killing his brother. Now, think about this. The first two people, Adam and Eve, do the one thing that God told them not to do. So they disobey God. Now we have the third person kills the fourth person. God is not batting very well in this game. When you think about the failure here, it's like God doesn't know what he's doing, does he? But God reaches out continually to, what does God do to Adam and Eve after they get expelled? God is the one that makes their clothing. That sort of throwaway line at the end of that, it said, God sewed clothes for Adam and Eve from the hides of animals. That's kind of powerful when you think about it. God is, we talk about, the Oscars were just in Los Angeles, and they always talk about who they're wearing, right? God. But think about it also, what did God he's making this out of hides. What did hides come from? Animals. What did God just finish making? Animals. So God sacrificed something that he had just made. I'm pretty sure that's where the unicorns went. But just think of it, God just finished making this, and now he says, for the love of my children, I'm going to sacrifice what I just made. And then we have Cain and Abel. So Abel's out of the picture. And I actually use this story for people who are stuck in scrupulosity, who think that God cannot forgive them. Because Cain just kills his brother. Does God write him off? He continues talking to him. God says, after the murder of Abel, he asked Cain, where is your brother? And Cain responds with just the famous response, am I my brother's keeper? It's a great question, isn't it? Am I my brother's keeper? Now, what if Cain were a shepherd, what would the answer be? Emphatic yes. You are your brother's keeper. What does Jesus teach us? We are to love our neighbor as ourselves. It's the golden rule. We are our brother's keeper. But Cain didn't think he was. God continues talking to Cain, though. And he says, well, the innocent blood of Abel, the shepherd, poured out on the earth by his brother Cain, closes the earth to Cain, so he can no longer be a farmer. He can no longer till the soil. But that's not the end of Cain, is it? God says, you will wander the earth. And Cain says, oh, that's not very fair. Somebody will, they'll know what I did and they'll kill me. And God said, no, they won't. I'll mark you and they'll know not to do that. So God is kind of taking the part of Cain, isn't he? And then Cain goes on. He moves to the land of Nod, east of Eden, and he founds a city. So by Semitic culture, Cain would be considered a success. He was a successful man. Founded a city. He had a son who had a son who had a son who had 2 sons. Okay? I remember what I said, whenever there's more than one, read it, because something's happening there. And this is what happened. One of those sons, his name was Jabal, is described as the ancestor of those who dwell in tents and keep livestock.